Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to wait, as always, a few seconds just for everyone to join us and settle in. So as I said, thank you for joining us. We're going to just leave it for a few more seconds and we will be starting shortly, just waiting for everyone to join us today. It's always like the longest minute. Okay, so shall we start then? So today we've got a really interesting topic, global employee mobility, top strategies to ensure compliance. So there's been so much going on in this area, especially due to the pandemic. So just before we start, we will be recording this webinar, and also the slides will be available post-webinar. So a link will be sent to you so over the next 24 hours. We do want to keep this interactive, so if you do have any questions, could you please add the questions to the Q&A box, and we will hopefully get round to answering these. We've also got a couple of poll questions, so please, make sure you do get involved in those as well. Okay, so let's start, shall we? Over to you, Barbara. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Thank you, Melanie. My name is Barbara. I'm based in Ireland, and I'm the Global Audit and Compliance Manager in Globalisation Partners. I'm a HR professional with a legal background. I've been working in HR for about 15 years, both in in-house and consultancy positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And over to Catherine.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon. So as Melanie said, my name is Catherine. I am the EMEA Counsel for Globalisation Partners based in the UK. I am a UK lawyer and have been practicing for over 10 years, but I don't want to give the exact time away. And my responsibility in GP is purely looking at the employment issues that our clients are faced with when expanding globally. So we will hire employees for our clients, and I need to figure out, along with my colleagues in the legal department and operations areas of the business, how we employ certain people in certain countries.
An interesting role then, and very topical and hard, I can imagine just now.
Yes, it is. It is very, very, very broad.
So many changes going on. Catherine, over to you.
Okay, so Globalisation Partners is a business that is, from an international perspective, we can hire employees in many different countries for clients. So that will then enable the client to test markets in specific countries without them having the need to actually set up those specific entities. So it cuts the costs for clients, cuts time, and also we're a compliance service. So all our employees in all the countries are enrolled on compliant and legally compliant platforms. They have employment contracts with Globalisation Partners, and our teams, our HR experts in all the various different countries will manage those employees from start to finish throughout the entire employment life cycle. So it takes away the need for the client to go through that lengthy and costly process of setting up in each and every country. So we will do that for you, and you can just test the market to see if it's a viable option for you. And that's in a nutshell what we do here at GP.
I think there's more and more companies doing that at the moment, aren't they? Sort of testing different markets before they go there permanently.
Definitely, and also in the current work from home climate, we've got many clients, new clients coming on board with us because they've already invested in that infrastructure of technology. So the borders and the boundaries and the barriers, and then, if you like, of expanding internationally has been broken down because of the fact every company to a certain degree, have to embrace the work from home model. So why not have somebody working from home in Lithuania as opposed to the UK or any of the other hubs that companies have regionally?
Okay, right. So I think we're going to start off on a poll. So just bear with me while I launch these. So the question on the poll is, what is your company's current policy on working remotely? Part of the team is fully remote and part of the team works from the office. Everyone works remotely, everyone works from the office. I'm going to launch this. What do you guys think is going to be the answer to this? The highest answer.
Yeah, I think it is going to be part of the team is fully remote. Barbara, what about you?
Either 1 or 2, but I'm edging towards 1. I think people will want a bit of both worlds.
Yeah, it's that hybrid working regime, isn't it, of being in the office and working from home.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just leave it a couple of seconds for those of you that haven't answered. If you could just, click on that, that'd be fabulous. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. And the results. Can you see the results? So yeah, fully remote and part of the team works from the office. I'm actually surprised that, I know it's only 3%, but there's 3% from people that work from the office, because I don't meet many people that permanently work from the office.
Yeah, that is an interesting outcome on that one.
Okay, right. So bear with me. The technology side here. So obviously, due to the pandemic, there is a revolution, isn't it? I think the whole world has changed now, and I don't think there's a way back. So there are cases where work from home has often become work from anywhere. Obviously, we've had loads of these CEOs making a point of saying you can work anywhere in the world, and most really people in the back end are just going, oh my God, why did they say that? How is this actually impacting companies?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, according to a report by McKinsey & Company, roughly 1/3 of the workforce began working from home as a result of the pandemic, which is huge. But even before the pandemic, we had the technology in place and people were getting the connectivity, so that employers and employees were already asking the question, do we really need to be in the office to work? And employees were asking, can I work from home? And I think a lot of it came down to trust at that stage, where employers were thinking, well, can we trust that person to work from home? So therefore they were cherry picking and letting some high performers work from home. And then some countries had the right to request to work remotely, whereas others didn't. But I think as a result of the pandemic, employers have realized that they can actually work from home now. I think the pandemic has answered that question, whether employers were ready for that answer or not. I think individuals within the workforce themselves have realized that it's okay to work from home, that it's easier, it stops the long commute, they can be around family longer, and the day is much longer for them when they work from home. It also, for companies, it's eliminating a lot of the costs with property. It also mitigates the immigration issues and boost productivity, and also they can follow that high talent. So if the talent is in another country, they can go and get that talent in that country. There's 2 different scenarios though, Melanie. There are those who work from home, and there's those who want to work anywhere, such as digital nomads. And I think as we become more digitally and technology enabled, employers have realized that people don't always have to work from an office or even work office hours as such, as long as they get the work done. So I think there's definitely a major change to work itself. And I think a lot of the reasons come down to life itself, less of a desire to live in cities. And that could be because of fear within the pandemic, but also future fears of pandemic. Also living in cities, obviously it's more expensive, so the cost of that urban living and the global rise in incentives to tempt employees to work remotely.
Also, Barbara, just adding, some of the risks as well that certainly we are seeing. If you have got people working from home, so the ability for those individuals to switch off and to stop working is becoming quite a problem. So there's a couple of issues with that. You've got the mental health side of things and the burnout aspect. So you've got people not working longer hours and not really having that downtime. And then that feeds into an impact on working hours. So in Europe, we do have the working time directive, and where individuals are working longer hours, how do companies manage? How can companies manage that working time? So it's making sure that you have certain policies and processes in place to really support your workforce. And it isn't for everyone. Working from home is hard. It throws up its own issues. So it's making sure that your workforce is supported. Additional issues that we are seeing is, as Barbara correctly said, people can work from anywhere. So we have seen in the news as well, and there's been a number of articles written about people who were based in one specific country have popped off to a different country to work, not actually realizing the implications and the impact to the business of doing that. So there's tax implications, there's data privacy, security, and that's without the legal contract issues. You can't, if you've got a UK-based contract, working in France, as great as that sounds, is totally different. What are you going to do for healthcare if you become unwell? Things like that. So we are seeing a lot of that, unfortunately. So for companies to say that you can work from anywhere, that did make a lot of us put our heads in our hands and think, oh no, what I'm saying, because there are bigger, wider issues by having that type of mindset and sending that message to your workforce. And a number of companies have found that it's a very costly message to be sending to your workforce. So it's getting that narrative right. But those are a couple of the risks that we are seeing with the remote work revolution, then, as you like.
Yeah, I've read, I've seen a few articles actually. So you've got some legislation being introduced in some countries, isn't it? The right to stop working at certain times. And I think that's going to be introduced, isn't it, to more and more countries. But then there's also an article that I read today about you can't enforce people to work from home. I think there's some new legislation, isn't there, that's going to start popping up, or people are going to start talking about this a lot more. Because as you're right. I don't think working from home's for everyone, is it?
No, it isn't, and it's got its own challenges. But again, when you are looking at the enforceability of having people work from home, what does their employment contract say? If the business is going to make a decision to start having everyone work from home, then you're going to have to consult with your employees. Some people are going to be up for it and they'll welcome it. Others are not going to be so happy. And you can only change contracts in the majority of countries around the world with consent. You can't do a unilateral change without consent. So if you don't have the employees on board, then you're not going to get that in. So then the support aspect comes in, and that's usually how you're able to get those consents off employees to change terms and conditions where necessary.
And the other thing that we discussed was that people lie. And obviously they don't necessarily tell their employees, but there's also the added side, which I naively didn't think about, that employees do lie about where they're actually working.
Yeah, it is, and it's a difficult one to manage, because you by having people work from home, as Barbara said, you are trusting individuals to be telling you the truth and to really be on board with the business. But I've seen a number of articles and a number of instances that's been publicized about individuals saying that they're working from a specific location where they are contractually bound to work from, and then they end up in a different country, and that opens a whole range of issue for clients and business, because they are bound then by tax issues and other complex legal issues when they have employees dotted around the world. And how can an employer support that? I mean, yeah, it's not great, but hopefully they're few and far between.
Okay, so how can companies ensure compliance when the workforce is looking to relocate internationally?
Yeah, so I think more and more companies, as we said, are looking to do this. And, you know, when individuals or companies are looking to relocate, you really need to do homework beforehand. You need to know the rules of the country, finding out if the employees have legal rights. Do you need to have visas? Visas can take anything between a couple of days to a couple of months to sort out. I mean, in some cases, you're talking 7 or 8 months. Are there family related matters that you need to consider? So with the workforce going across, are they bringing family with them? Do they need family visas? So it's really doing your homework about, you know, the workforce that you have, the country that you're going into, and then really looking at the cost. You can only really make a decision when you've looked at the impact to your entire workforce, and then you can start assessing the cost. You then need to look at the compliance issues, namely, you know, do you need to set up in a specific country in order to support that individual? If you need to set up in a specific country, companies need to look at bank accounts, they need to look at employment contracts, they need to look at policies and procedures in order to support those people in country. It might not even be viable. I mean, if you've got 1 or 2 employees wanting to, or if you need 1 or 2 employees to work in a specific country, it may be more cost effective to actually hire those nationals directly from those countries. So, you know, there are a number of things that companies really need to look at before they even make the decision of whether they're going to go into a country, and looking at, you know, the specific requirements, you know, as what is needed in any specific area. And as well, you've also got CBAs in many countries, certainly in Europe, and they can be very challenging. So that will come into the employability side of things. How are you going to support that individual as you would in your home country in a different country? You need the expertise. So, and this is what globalization partners do anyway. So that could be an option for any business if they are looking to go further afield.
I agree with that. I mean, if you consider establishing an entity in any country, that can take 4 to 6 months. And then you have all of the costs involved in that as well. And having one individual in a country where you aren't established properly could end up having a permanent establishment and all the tax implications behind that as well. And I think employers forget that. They think, oh, that's just one individual, they'll be okay. But the reality is that there's huge liability behind it and risk. So it's really important that you look into that. And as well, the costs, obviously the cost of benefits, the cost of standard of living is different in different countries. So you really do need a total reward specialist to do a regular cost of work assessment and then decide, are you going to actually change that person's salary based on the standard of living where they're now living? You know, the same salary doesn't buy you the same amount in each country. So you've got to take that into account as well.
Definitely. And also, you know, when you are looking at entities and setting up new entities in each and every country, they're different. Some countries have a local director requirement where you have to have a specific national. For instance, in Greece, you have to have a Greek national already, you know, in country managing the company from Greece. So, you know, you really do need to look at things like that. And it's not just a matter of, you know, having an established business in any country and then thinking, okay, well, we've done it here, we'll just pop off and do it there. It's straightforward, and just trying to mirror that, it doesn't work. And that type of mentality, that type of thought process will certainly cost the business a heck of a lot more than is necessary.
You're totally right. And even employment law, Catherine, you see this so much. People don't realize how different employment law even is within Europe, that, you know, they bring out a directive, we implement that into our own national laws, but then we implement it differently. And the devil, as you know yourself, Catherine, is always in the detail when it comes to employment law. Definitely.
And I'm just going to mention one piece of legislation. The transfer of undertakings legislation is an absolute nightmare. One piece of European legislation is interpreted totally differently in each and every country in what was the European Union, with the UK involved. So it's totally different. So yeah, you are exactly right, Barbara.
Exactly. TP has like 30 pages of legislation in the UK and 6 in Ireland. I mean, you couldn't have a piece of legislation implemented so differently in so many different countries. Definitely. And yet it has, you know, everybody, we consider it to be the same piece of legislation, but it really isn't, you know.
No. Yeah, it isn't. And terminating and hiring in one country and everything else in between is totally different in another.
I know some guys from the US find it quite difficult when they're looking to fire people in Europe, because obviously in different countries in Europe it's very different from what it is to the UK to maybe Germany or France, isn't it? So
definitely, yes, definitely. It's you know, you always need to go, as you would in any country, you go back to basics and you just look at, you know, get the evidence, look at the situation that you've got before you, and then just start looking at the safest outcome and the one that's got the less impact to the business and also the employees. It's difficult, but I mean that's our job, so that's something that we've got to do every day.
And do you find that there's a lot of companies that do it the wrong way round? You know, do you find a lot of people like, okay, I'm going to not think about the country I'm going to, but that's a good country? So do you find there's more companies that do that? So we need to basically turn it around and be a bit more organised.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, there's clients that we've worked with in the past that have actually gone into a country and set up, but not understood the specific requirements in order to actually hire somebody. So, I mean, you know, for instance, in the UK, you set up an entity, you set up a business, and then you hire the you know, individuals that you need to support that business and you know, obviously to hopefully flourish. It's not like that in other countries. You do need to, yes, you need to set up an entity, but you also need to apply for certain labour licenses. And the labour license will depend on you know, what is in your articles of association. And if you don't put down the right information in your articles of association, you can't apply for specific labour licenses. So it's looking at that, and we've had to step in and support clients where they got it a little bit wrong, and they have the entity, but it wasn't set up properly in order to allow them to hire individuals. So it is very complex. So if you do the groundwork and the research ahead of time, you should always you know, have all that information at hand well in advance. So for instance, labour licensing, sometimes you can apply for a labour license as you're starting the incorporation of the business. Other times you can only do it after you've incorporated, and some countries don't need licenses. So it's understanding what you need to do to actually hire one person, and then, you know, on the back end, you know, you need your payroll providers, your insurances, and you know, the HR policies and processes to support individuals. Some countries you have to have policies in place immediately from headcount 1. In other countries, you have headcount triggers where you'll need to implement health and safety policy if you've got 5 people, you know, things like that. So just do your homework.
Get a t-shirt with that on.
Yeah, I say that to my daughter all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so for many employees, the transition to become digital nomads is becoming a reality due to remote work visas. What should companies keep in mind about such remote work visas?
Yeah, so I think we've touched on this. So, you know, when you're looking at individuals that need visas, it's making sure that the people that you're hiring and where you specifically need these visas are eligible to have them in the first place, because depending on which country individuals are coming from, you might not, you know, you might have to wait a little bit longer, you might have additional paperwork. So it's just making sure that the individuals you are wanting to put in specific countries have the necessary requirements in order to you know, meet the requirements of the visa. In terms of, you know, the digital nomads as it's been termed, and, you know, getting individuals in specific countries, that currently the labour and the talent that is around the world is incredible, but still you still need to make sure that, you know, you are doing your best in order to support the individuals, and that they have the necessary criteria, visas, employment documents, everything that needs to be put in place in order for them to legally work in that specific country. So yeah, it's just making sure that they've got everything in place in order to be supported there. Barbara, have you got anything that you wanted to add on that?
I totally agree with that. And I also think, you know, if an employee, your employees come into you and they say that they want to work remotely through a remote work visa, the thing you really should put in place is a global mobility policy where you can actually set out the circumstances where your company will permit an international move. So you can think about it strategically before you go into it. And that can include things like clarity around roles and responsibilities, who pay moving expenses, what to do if there's an emergency, and who's responsible for taxes. And considering as well that some countries might have double taxation agreements. In some countries, the employee might actually have to pay taxes simultaneously, both internationally and locally. So it's really important that you take that into account first, rather than being stuck in a situation where somebody says, oh, I thought you might do it for me, you know, and then you could have a problem at that stage. Also, the employing entity will have to continue to make all required tax deductions in the home location as well. So, you know, and if an employee then comes to you and they are working remotely in another location and say they want to stay there long term, that again would have other complex issues that you need to think through at that stage.
Definitely.
And shall I say the B word? So obviously we're in, we're 6 months into Brexit. So with regards to, has that had any impact at all, or are we still seeing how that's going on?
Yeah, Brexit has had a huge impact in terms of trying to support non-UK citizens coming in and working into the UK is really complicated, and it's very costly for a lot of companies. I think when I did a calculation a couple of months ago as to a standard one-person visa that isn't government funded, it was something like £21,000, and that was just for the initial application, getting the individual through the application process, and that is for a 5-year visa. So that's a lot of money on top of, you know, supporting that individual coming into the country. So yeah, I mean, for a lot of companies, it's just stopped their business in the UK completely. So you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the background to understand it, because it's far from straightforward. And I'm still trying to figure out at which point this is encouraging business to come into the UK. I haven't found the devil in that detail yet, so I'm still looking for it.
So maybe in the next one you may have found the answer.
Oh, I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so go on to our next poll. So just bear with me while I launch that. So let me just go on to this. I love it when software changes it all the time. Okay, so do you think companies are doing enough to address the risks associated with the work from anywhere model? Yes or no? Nice, easy one to answer. What do you think is going to be the answer on this one?
Definitely no.
I agree. Yeah, I hope we're pleasantly surprised though.
Yeah, me too. I think a lot of the time they don't realize the risk. No,
not at all. And certainly when you know, you are a business with cross-border interests, yeah, it's a difficult one.
Okay, so thank you to those of you that have answered. I'm just going to close the poll now. And you guys are right. So 85% said no. So that's a really high percentage, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is, definitely.
How do you feel? Well, I suppose we're just, yeah, that's why we're doing these sorts of webinars, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Okay, just bear with me. So what should companies keep in mind when implementing a compliant remote work policy? Barbara, is that over to you?
Yeah, I'll take that one there. I think companies need to realize when people are on the move that They need to have that global mobility policy in the background. They need to know in advance what they will and will not allow and how they'll allow it to work. I also think when it comes to international hires, a company might need to think as well, how much are we going to put into this? I mean, if you have one person who wants to go and live in a certain country, to set up an entity, whether that be a subsidiary or a brand, to set up a payroll in that country, there's a huge amount behind it. And it might be worth your while going a different route, whether that's an employer of record that can take care of things like benefits, taxes, or payroll, you know, all of the background work for you. And also you can put that person in country quite quickly working, as opposed to all the work behind it. I mean, I can give you an example of that. We would have had Monday.com, an international company based in Tel Aviv. They wanted to put people in Brazil and Canada. They didn't have any presence in those countries at the time. And we were able to put together a benefits package, put together contracts of employment, put these employees under our legal entities in those countries and have them working very quickly so that they didn't have to do all the work behind the scenes for it. So I think definitely there's a lot of long-term planning that goes into that. What do you think, Kath?
Yeah, so I think, you know, making sure that you've got that policy in place in the background is great. Also understanding, you know, the legal landscape in any one specific country. We are getting changes in legislation daily in specific countries to do with remote work or telework, as it's called in a number of European countries, and the specific requirements that are, or the obligations on a business to, you know, put that in place is quite significant. I mean, it could be anything from payments to payments towards internet, you know, desk provisions, chairs, you know, the home office and supporting that, all the way through to even, you know, in some countries you've got more rest breaks, so they're trying to limit the burnout. And you know, the health and safety aspect as well. I mean, what you know, companies do need to support their employees from a mental health side of things, and what are companies doing to, you know, to support that. Again, we talk about GDPR and data compliance. You need to assess that in your business, and just to make sure that that everything is as secure as needs to be. Even though you've got people working from home, and expenses as well. So if you've got more people working from home, you've possibly got some additional expenses, namely, you know, printing facilities that individuals need to have. You might need to set up additional postal requirements in order to set documents, couriers, those types of things. Companies need to really be need to have in mind when they are looking at you know, policies like that. Because if you do miss something, yes, you can always go back and add it, but it makes it a little bit more difficult for, you know, for when you are actually implementing certain things, and individuals are, you know, just continually asking questions, and there's no answer because you are missing certain aspects of those requirements of working from home.
I agree. And also when you go into another country, you also have to see it from that country, how they implement laws. I mean, we're seeing a lot of remote working legislation, as Catherine said, in Brazil, Mexico, Peru. But if you're coming from a country that doesn't have that type of legislation, you're not necessarily thinking, do they have it? So you could be caught out very quickly by not even knowing what to look for. I mean, we've seen as well in other countries where they have collective bargaining agreements, and you know, that might not necessarily be something that's very prominent in the country that you're actually in when you're sending somebody to work there. So it's really important that you know what you're walking into as well, and what legislation is there or on track to come into that country.
Definitely.
Noticed on the mental health side, there's been companies that have given their staff time off, like the whole company shut down, or they're having, you know, Zoom free Fridays, although I think people try and have that anyway, don't they, on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
But it's definitely coming to the forefront, because I think a lot of people are tired, aren't they, because it's continuous.
Definitely. And countries, you know, governments in specific countries are seeing that, and certainly where you've got employee-friendly countries. You really do need to look at the changes in the legislation that are coming in, and as I said, we've had to look at telework legislation across a number of European countries, and certainly at the start of the year and towards the end of last year. So they are changing, and they are changing regularly. So make sure that if you do have the multi-jurisdictional companies, that you are aware of the changes, and also implementing that into your business.
This may be a stupid question. With the working from home legislation, are they turning it around quite quickly in a lot of countries?
Yes.
Is it almost like they can implement it with a click of a button? Yeah. Almost? Yeah.
So in Italy, I think back last year we had less than 48 hours to implement certain work from home regulations, and nobody knew what was happening until they published the legislation. There was 48 hours to implement the legislation. So yeah, that was trying, but yeah, as a business, you've just got to make sure that you are signed up to certain providers to get that up-to-date information, whether it's government websites or legal service providers, HR service providers, whatever that may be. But you have to keep your finger on the pulse with this.
I agree, and I think as well, I don't know what you think about this, Catherine, but I think governments are drafting and implementing legislation much faster than they did before the pandemic. I think when we had all of the pandemic, it came out of nowhere and they had to deal with it, and they suddenly realized we can run with the piece of legislation much faster than we did. I mean, we saw that in Ireland with the right to disconnect. Usually in Ireland, a bill would come out and everybody would be talking about it for a few years, and by the time it would get through, but it just came out very, very quickly. And I think other countries around the world are doing the same. What are your thoughts, Kat? Do you think as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of countries have had to react quickly, because nobody really foresaw what the impact the pandemic was going to have, and yes, they've had to respond. They've had to respond quickly, and I don't think a lot of the time legislation in a number of countries are changed because of outside pressures, namely union pressures. But I don't that wasn't the case with this. So yes, there were some slight pressures or grumblings, but ultimately the second that they saw that the government saw that they had to change an aspect of their legislation, it was through. So that was really interesting to see that they were governments have been quite quick on the uptick of introducing new legislation. Some not so quick, UK not so quick, but yeah, that's nothing new.
I heard that a lot of governments like to release stuff on a Friday evening, so so that's sort of dismay to the professionals out there. It's just like, why, in different countries, including the UK, great Friday evening.
Yeah, Friday evening.
So what's the solution for companies looking to harness global mobility of their workforce and manage employee relocation compliantly?
I think you really need to think it through. I think you need to think about, how are we going to go about this? Do we think we're going to have a huge workforce within that country itself? Is it worth our while getting involved with lawyers, payroll companies within the local country itself, tax specialists? Or do we want to go with a company that kind of can take care of all of this together, whether that be an employer of record or any other option that a company can think of? Because it is a case of, you can't leave out part of the jigsaw, so you have to bring the whole puzzle together, because there's liability with all of it. And I think the most important thing is that you take it from the fact that this person is going to be in another country. So the laws of that country, what are they, and what needs to be in the contract in that country, not in your home country? How does that country deal with specific aspects of employment? And I think you need to take it from the perspective of that country. That's very hard to do if you don't have people on the ground in that country. So if you go to whether it be an employer of record or any other option that has people on the ground in the country, it definitely not only gives you more speed, but also peace of mind. What do you think, Catherine?
bear with, sorry, I was just on mute. I think a lot of it depends on the business, because, you know, what is the business mindset? If the company is thinking, oh, you know, we might try this, or we are not, then they're not committed to making that expansion in a specific country, then maybe you've got some time to do a little bit of background research and really just start looking at different aspects and just taking them in bite-sized chunks. But if you've got a company that is committed to making a change and going into 1, 2, 3, however many different jurisdictions quite quickly, because timeline, cost, and, you know, those things are the main driving factors, then you may want to, you know, look at using a third party in the first instance whilst the business starts building up the information they need and what they want to actually do in a specific country. I mean, we've got clients who came to us initially with the idea of, you know, they're only going to use our business model for a couple of months until they set up in country, realized how difficult it was, and 2, 3, 4 years down the later, we still with those clients, still supporting employees. Other clients, you know, want to come on board for, you know, from a long-term perspective, and it's ended up being much shorter than they'd anticipated, and they've set up their own business. So it really depends on, you know, the actual business and looking specifically at timeline and cost. How quickly do you want to get in this country? If a market has opened up in a specific country and you want to capitalize on that immediately, then, you know, using a third party is really one of the only options, because setting up an entity is going to take time, it's going to take effort, and it is going to take some money. So it's understanding, you know, those aspects and committing to them. The second you make the decision of right, okay, you know, there's this opportunity in a specific country that we really want to capitalize on, then make that decision and stick with it and move on. The things that really cost companies is the indecisiveness of where they think, right, we've made a decision and then we'll change our mind, and then we'll make another decision and then we'll change our mind, and then you're just going around in circles. Make the decision, stick to it, and move on. And if you're still unsure, use a third party, because then that will reduce your cost, it will reduce your liability, and, you know, it is then down to that third party to manage that, you know, that workforce and that headcount with you, with that business. But if there's a country that a company's really been looking at for a number of years, they've done the research, or even a number of months actually, they've done the research, it's a good fit for them, then just start the process. Go out to a good reputable lawyer and then start the process of setting up that entity, knowing that it's going to take a number of months before you can even get your first person in country in seat. So that is, those are just some high level things that I would say the best things for companies just to start considering from the outset.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So we've come to the end, and we have a question. Well, we've got a number of questions actually. One question I have got, and again I've read this quite a lot in the sort of like the global press, and somebody's mentioned it on chat, and it's regarding working and those that have got the COVID vaccination and those that don't. So I don't think there's any legislation implemented, or, you know, there's nothing implemented with regards to vaccinations. I know I've read that, you know, companies do need to be careful, but have you read anything from sort of the HR legal side about where people stand with those that have been vaccinated and those that haven't?
Well, ultimately, certainly from my perspective, and Barbara, I'd be really interested to see what you've come across as well, from a compliance point of view. But from a legal perspective, you can't force employees to take a vaccine. It has to be the individual's choice. We've got the wonderful piece of legislation called the Human Rights Act, and the Human Rights Directive, which, you know, we have the right and the autonomy to, to control our own bodies. So saying yes or no to a vaccine is our personal choice. However, the business, they do have to manage the risk. They can't, at the moment, based on the current legislation, they can't terminate somebody because they haven't had a vaccine, unless there is a specific requirement in their employment contract that allows them to do that, which I highly doubt it, given how early on into the coming out of the pandemic we are, hopefully, fingers crossed. So, from that point of view, companies can encourage employees to make the best decision for them, and allow individuals who are wanting to take the vaccine, maybe give them half a day off or some time in lieu, just to encourage that, give them some guidance and reassurance as to the support that they will get. So if they're unwell, because there's a lot of information, conflicted information out there about people who are going to be ill after a certain vaccine and not after another, just have that dialogue with your employee, saying that, if you're unwell, you're unwell, and we'll support you. But I mean, from a business perspective, trying to force individuals to have a vaccine, that isn't possible. I think in time, certainly in certain sectors, there may be certain things drawn into employment contracts as to the requirements. You can only have a specific post in a healthcare providing profession if you've had your vaccinations. That I might be wrong on that, but I see that is the way that certain things are going based on what I'm reading right now. But yes, right now there is no piece of legislation that deals with whether you can't force somebody to take a vaccine. There are protections on that. Barbara, what have you come across?
I totally agree with that. Regarding bodily integrity, as an employer, you can't say to somebody you must get a vaccine. And I would agree with you, Catherine. It's about encouragement to go and get that vaccine, whether that is that half day off or the day off, and encouraging them to actually go and do it themselves. So I agree. That's exactly what I would have thought.
Okay, so we have another question. We're changing tact now, changing the subject slightly. Can an employee decide to work remotely but continue to pay taxes, other statutory obligations based on the contract work location per se?
So I'm going to break that down a little bit. So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So if somebody, say, for instance, is working in the UK and they decide to pop off and work from France, can they still pay the tax in the UK? The answer to that is highly unlikely. It depends how long they're in France for. I mean, if they're only in a different country for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, different countries will have different guidelines and legislation on how long individuals can be in that country before they need to start paying tax. So double check the country requirements. Some countries are 2 years, some countries are 12 months, it depends. So double check, but you also need to double check whether there's a double taxation requirement. So from an employer perspective, if you know that you've got individuals that are supposed to be, say, for instance, in the UK, and they've traveled to France, or they're country hopping and go into every country, spending a month in each country in a camper van or whatever, you really do need to double check and get specific tax advice, because there is a likelihood that the company would have to pay additional tax. So I would say take tax advice. I'm not a tax lawyer. Tax isn't my strongest point. But yes, that would be the best advice that I can give.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Barbara.
I agree. You just need to check how long that individual can stay in that country before establishing residency. In a lot of countries, that's 183 days, 6 months, but that's not every country. And countries will have their own rules. And you need to know in advance whether they're withholding tax issues. It's a bit late when somebody's in the country itself. So I totally agree. They need to do that homework first, I think.
And also just touching on one other aspect, Melanie, if you've got employees that are refusing to come home, because that's also happened, they could run the risk of having a criminal sanction raised against them from a specific country's home office government. So they could be arrested from an immigration point of view.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that point of view. So you got potentially employees lying where they're working, and also they could get criminal record because they don't want to change.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, so dangerous business, isn't it? Sometimes working from home. Can a company reject employee requesting for working from another country?
Yes, they can, because I mean, I've seen a number of articles in on LinkedIn and a couple of legal forums that where the difficulties are when you have a company that have really embraced the remote work concept and is completely remote work, can completely remote work. The issues are you have individuals in the UK, all around the world, and why shouldn't they travel? Why shouldn't they be able to go and work in all these countries if the business is fully remote? The issue that you've got is the employment contract. The employee has to have a specific country from which they're living, they're a resident, and the company also may have a specific requirement for that employee to be in that specific country. So if part of the employment contract states that the employee is hired and they live and work in a specific location and they go elsewhere, that is a potential breach of contract. What companies need to be careful of is that they really consider the possibility of individuals residing in other countries and really look at whether it is a possibility for them to go in another country. Do they need to set up their own entity, for instance? That is unreasonable. If you've got one person wanting to work in another country and again they're refusing to come home, and as a business you're being asked to support them somewhere else, what's reasonable? Is it possible? And if it's not possible and you need that specific individual in that specific country, or in order to support an individual in wherever they want to go and live and work, it's not a reasonable request, then of course, yes, you can refuse that.
Definitely. And we even saw at the start of the pandemic where somebody would have traveled home. They may have been in the UK or another country working, but their family in another country. So at the start of the pandemic, people would have traveled home to be with their family, not expecting to be there for so long. And then it's a case of, I can't work through my employer in this country. They don't have an entity, but yet I do need to continue working. And they weren't able to fly back because borders had closed. And we found a lot of people coming to us, or companies coming to us as well in that situation. They didn't want to lose the employee, a very stressful time. The employee wanted to continue working, but they couldn't legally continue working under that company in that country. And it was an awful situation for people to be in, and such a stressful situation to begin with in the middle of a pandemic, not to mention everything else on top of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so another question we have is, would UK employees need A1 form during short assignment in EU countries if the employee wants to continue pay NI contributions but wants to be covered in EU country while on assignment?
Oh, that's a good question.
Is that one that's taken offline, or can you?
I think so, because we'd have to delve into a little bit more detail as to the specific situation, and again length of time, and what they're going to be doing and things like that. So we would need a little bit more information in order to give some more information on that.
Well, you've answered it in a way that it's a hard one. It's a hard question to answer. So
yeah,
but we can be in contact with you after just to get a bit more detail. So have you seen any hiring trends sort of during lockdown? Because people are still hiring, aren't they? So are people hiring more people from abroad, or within country? What sort of trends have you seen?
So what we have seen, there's been even a greater uptick really on hiring internationally. As a business at the start of the pandemic, every company. They just didn't know how things were going to go. But for our business, we've just it's gone absolutely crazy in terms of the number of new clients that are coming in to hire in different countries. We're getting really unique countries in, which we've got our high ticket, our regular countries, in the European Union and Singapore and some other countries, but there's a country that I hadn't come across for a long time, and that was Azerbaijan recently. So we are getting some unique countries. We've been asked to support in unique countries, which is not something that I would have put a bet on at the beginning of the pandemic, that we would have been going into other countries and expanding our country portfolio.
I agree. I think companies they're following the talent, especially for high skills or specific roles. They're going to go out there and get the best talent no matter where it is, and they'll allow them to work from home now. I think before the pandemic, they were thinking, well, they won't be in the office and they're not going to be around the rest of the team, and how will they communicate and how will they collaborate? And I don't think that's a problem anymore. Do you, Catherine?
No, definitely not. I think there's a lot of work that companies are putting into trying to keep that connection with their employees. So and I think there's more individuals being hired in those specific countries rather than cross-border hiring. So that's again what we are seeing more of at the minute.
Okay, well, I think that's going to be the end of the questions. Somebody's talking about Azerbaijan.
It's a great country.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to get there at some point over the next 12 months or start traveling. I think we're all ready for that. So I think we've got a few key takeaways from today's session. Thank you, Catherine and Barbara, so much for sharing your insights and your knowledge. And I think it's going to be a growing subject, really, isn't it, as we go on through the pandemic. Loads of people wanted to work from home and they couldn't. Now they can, and now they can work in different countries, and that's brought all sorts of different problems, hasn't it? Yeah. So thank you once again, and I hope to see you soon on a webinar shortly. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Barbara and Catherine, they can link in with you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, no problem.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email me and I can pass them on. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.